The courtroom was silent, too silent. Doro sat at the defense table, her hands trembling as the judge flipped through the pages of her grandfather's will. Across from her, her parents, the same people who left her at an orphanage when she was 4, glared at her with entitlement. "We're her real parents," her mother's lawyer shouted. "We deserve a share of the $2.7 million inheritance." The judge looked at Doro. Her voice broke, but her words were clear. "They didn't want me when I had nothing. Now they want me because I have everything." And that's how the war began. Not just for money, but for the truth of who truly deserved to be called family. Rain poured heavily that night when little Doro, just 4 years old, sat crying outside a quiet church. Her tiny hands clutched a small bag, her clothes soaked and cold. Inside that bag was all she had: a piece of bread, an old blanket, and a silver locket with her name Doro, and the letters enkay engraved on it. She didn't understand what was happening. All she knew was that her parents, Bari and Mina, had told her to wait there, and that they would come back. But they never did. They had been struggling for a long time, drowning in debt and arguments. To them, Doro was not a blessing anymore. She was just one more mouth to feed, one more problem to solve. So when things got hard, they made a cruel choice. They left her behind and walked away like she never existed. Hours later, when the rain finally slowed, the church door opened, and a gentle old pastor stepped outside. He saw the small child shivering near the steps, her eyes swollen from crying. Without hesitation, he picked her up and took her inside. From that night on, she became part of the church orphanage. The pastor, everyone called him Papa Jonah, gave her food, a warm bed, and love. The other children became her family. She didn't have fancy toys or new clothes, but she had safety. She grew up learning kindness, hard work, and faith. Each night before sleeping, she would hold her locket and whisper, "One day, I'll know who you are, enkay." It was the only piece of her past she had left. As Doro grew older, she learned not to ask why her parents had left. The pain was too heavy to carry. Instead, she focused on helping others, comforting new children who arrived crying, just like she once did. Everyone in the orphanage loved her for her warm heart and gentle smile. Years passed, and the memories of that rainy night faded, but the scar it left on her heart never truly disappeared. Sometimes, when she saw other parents visiting their children, she felt a quiet ache inside, a longing for something she never really had. Still, she never let bitterness grow inside her. She promised herself that no child should ever feel as unwanted as she once did. She didn't know it then, but the little locket she wore every day would one day change her entire life. At 24, Doro had built a quiet, simple life for herself. She worked at a small bookstore during the week, and spent her weekends volunteering at a community library that helped underprivileged children learn to read. The library was her favorite place in the world, filled with laughter, old books, and the hope of better days. She loved reading stories to the kids, and teaching them that even small beginnings could lead to big dreams. One sunny afternoon, while arranging books on the shelves, she noticed an elderly man walk in. He was tall and elegant, dressed neatly in a gray suit. His hair was silver, and though his face carried the marks of age, his eyes were sharp and kind. He smiled politely at her as he looked around the room, taking in the cheerful noise of children reading aloud. Doro walked over to greet him. "Good afternoon, sir," she said softly. "Are you here for the reading program?" The old man smiled faintly. "Yes, I came to see how the young ones are learning," he replied in a calm voice. There was something familiar about him, something Doro couldn't quite explain. As they talked, his gaze fell on the silver locket hanging around her neck. His smile suddenly faded. His eyes widened, and he took a small step closer. "Child, where did you get that?" he asked, his voice trembling. Doro froze. She had worn that locket her whole life, never taking it off. Confused, she held it gently. "I've had it since I was a baby," she said quietly. "It's the only thing my parents left me with." The man's hands shook as he reached for the locket but stopped halfway, as if afraid it wasn't real. Tears filled his eyes. "That locket," he whispered, "was made for my granddaughter, my little Doro." The room fell silent. Doro's heart raced. "Your granddaughter?" she repeated, barely believing what she heard. He nodded slowly. "My name is Adamu Kori," he said, his voice breaking. "I am your grandfather. I've been searching for you for 20 years. For a long moment, Doro couldn't speak. The man in front of her, the one who seemed like a stranger, was the family she thought she'd never have. Tears rolled down her cheeks as he gently placed his trembling hand on hers. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt since childhood: belonging. The locket she once thought was just a memory had led her back to the one person who had never stopped looking for her. When Doro finally sat with Adamu in his quiet home, it felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. The house was warm, filled with the scent of old books and framed photos of people she didn't know. On the table between them were several albums, the leather covers worn and faded. Adamu opened one carefully, his hands trembling, and inside were pictures of a younger man holding a baby with the same brown eyes as Doro. Tears filled her eyes. "Is that me?" she asked softly. Adamu nodded. "Yes, my little Doro," he whispered. "You were just 1 year old here." He took a shaky breath before continuing. "I tried everything to keep you. I beg your parents not to abandon you. I told them that love mattered more than money, but they didn't listen." He looked away, the pain clear in his eyes. "Your father, Bari, and your mother, Mina, were always chasing wealth. They thought I was selfish because I wouldn't hand over my company and properties to them while I was alive. I wanted them to learn hard work, to earn things with honesty, but they only wanted what I owned, not what I stood for." Doro listened quietly, her heart breaking with every word. Adamu continued. "When I refused to give them money, they became angry. They told me I was choosing morals over family. One night they disappeared with you. I searched for years. I went to every orphanage, every police station, hoping someone had seen a little girl with your name. But it was like you vanished." He wiped a tear from his cheek and smiled faintly. "I never stopped praying that one day I'd find you. And today here you are, a grown woman, kind, hardworking, everything I hoped you'd become." Doro held his hand gently. "You didn't lose me," she said quietly. "You found me again." Adamu smiled weakly. His health was failing, and she could see the tiredness in his eyes. But there was peace too, the kind that comes from finally mending a broken part of the heart. "Doro," he said softly, "I don't have many days left, but I want you to carry forward our name, not with greed, but with kindness. You are my true heir, not because of money, but because of the heart you have." Doro's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. That night, she realized she hadn't just found her grandfather, she had found the missing piece of her life, and the truth that would change everything. A few months after Doro met her grandfather, life felt brighter than ever. She spent most of her time with Adamu, helping him in the garden, reading to him from his favorite books, and listening to his old stories about love, mistakes, and second chances. He had become the family she had always longed for, gentle, wise, and proud of her. But as the days passed, Doro noticed his steps growing slower, his hands trembling more, and his voice fading when he spoke for too long. She knew time was slipping away. One quiet morning, she knocked on his bedroom door and got no answer. When she went inside, she found him lying peacefully on his bed, a faint smile on his face as if he had fallen asleep in peace. Her heart broke. The man who had given her a reason to believe in family again was gone. She sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, whispering, "Thank you for finding me." The funeral took place a few days later. People from all over came to pay their respects. Neighbors, workers, old friends, even children from charities he had supported. Many cried, sharing stories about how Adamu had helped them when they had nothing. But two people were missing, Bari and Mina. His own son and daughter-in-law didn't show up. They hadn't even called. Their absence spoke louder than any words could. When the lawyer later gathered everyone in Adamu's study to read the will, Doro sat quietly, still lost in grief. The lawyer opened a sealed envelope and began to read aloud. Adamu had left everything: his countryside estate, his savings, and his $2.7 million inheritance, to Doro. The room went silent. She couldn't believe it. Tears filled her eyes, not from excitement, but from the overwhelming feeling that she finally belonged somewhere. For once in her life, she wasn't the abandoned girl at the church steps. She was Doro Corey, Adamu's granddaughter. In the weeks that followed, Doro moved into the estate, a peaceful house surrounded by tall trees and open fields. Every corner of the place reminded her of him. The books he loved, the garden he tended, the bench where he used to sit and talk to her about life. She promised herself that she would honor him by living with the same kindness he taught her. But that peace didn't last. Late one evening as she walked through the house, she received a letter, one that would change everything. It was from her parents, Bari and Mina, the same people who had abandoned her years ago. And this time, they wanted something she wasn't ready to give. It had only been a month since Doro buried her grandfather when her past came knocking again. The part she thought she had left behind forever. One morning, as she stepped out to water the garden, a black car stopped outside the gate. From it stepped a man and woman dressed in expensive clothes, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. For a moment, Doro didn't recognize them. But then, when the woman removed her glasses and forced a smile, Doro froze. It was her mother, Mina. And standing beside her, pretending to look emotional, was her father, Bari. Her heart pounded. They looked nothing like the parents she remembered, the poor, desperate couple who had abandoned her in the rain. Now they looked like people who had everything they once wanted. Doro, Mina called softly, pretending to cry. My baby, we finally found you. Doro didn't answer. She could see through the fake tears and the rehearsed words. You left me, she said quietly. You didn't even look back. Bari sighed, stepping forward with a forced expression of guilt. We made mistakes, he said. But we are still your parents. And we deserve to be part of your life and your father's inheritance. That last line told her everything. They weren't here for love or regret. They were here for money. Doro turned away and told them calmly that her grandfather's wealth had nothing to do with them. She asked them to leave. A week later, a letter arrived from a law firm. Her parents had filed a lawsuit against her, demanding a share of the $2.7 million inheritance. Their lawyer claimed Doro had manipulated Adamu into naming her as the sole heir, saying she took advantage of his old age and weak health. They stood before the court and declared, she is our biological daughter. We made her who she is. We have a right to her success. Doro was stunned. The same people who had thrown her away now wanted to profit from her life. The media caught wind of the story, painting it as a family feud over fortune. People whispered and judged without knowing the truth. Doro stayed silent at first, letting the storm build. But deep inside, pain mixed with anger. Her parents had abandoned her when she was worth nothing, and now that she had something, they wanted to claim her again. This wasn't just about money, it was about greed, lies, and the ugly side of family. And as the court date drew near, Doro realized she was no longer the little girl who cried at the church steps. This time, she was ready to fight back. The courtroom was full that morning. Reporters filled the seats, cameras flashing as Doro quietly walked in with her lawyer, Fina. Across the room sat Bari and Mina, dressed in elegant clothes, pretending to be heartbroken parents. Their faces showed fake sadness, but their eyes were sharp and greedy. They whispered to their lawyer, who smirked confidently, ready to twist the story. When the judge entered, the case began. Bari's lawyer stood first and spoke loudly, calling Doro an ungrateful orphan who had tricked an old, lonely man into giving her everything. He said she had filled Adamu's head with lies, made him believe she was the perfect granddaughter, and pushed her parents away. Mina wiped fake tears as their lawyer spoke, shaking her head as if heartbroken. Doro sat quietly, her heart heavy. She couldn't believe her own parents were trying to destroy her again. Not with words of love this time, but with lies. But Fina, her lawyer, didn't flinch. She waited patiently, her expression calm but her eyes burning with quiet determination. When it was finally her turn, she stood and began speaking with confidence. Fina presented the first piece of evidence, the adoption papers from the church orphanage, signed and dated by the local authorities, proving Doro had been legally abandoned by Bari and Mina years ago. Next, she handed the judge a copy of the police report filed the night Doro was found outside the church in the rain. This, she said clearly, is the report that began her life without parents. The courtroom grew silent. Bari and Mina shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Fina wasn't done. She showed photographs, letters from the orphanage, and witness statements from people who had seen how Doro was found and raised. Every word, every document, broke down the lies Bari and Mina had tried to build. But just when it seemed the truth was winning, Bari's lawyer stood again. With a proud look, he pulled out a letter and handed it to the judge. This, he said, is a letter from Mr. Adamu Kori himself, written before his death. In it, he says he regretted naming Doro as heir, and wanted his wealth to return to his real family. Gasps filled the courtroom. Even the judge looked shocked. Doro's hands shook as she stared at the paper. The handwriting looked almost like her grandfather's, but something felt wrong. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning every line. Then she saw it, the date written at the bottom. Her heart stopped for a second. It was dated 2 months after Adamu's death. Doro looked up slowly, her fear replaced by strength. She had just spotted the mistake that would expose everything. Doro stared at the letter lying on the judge's desk. Everyone in the courtroom held their breath as the judge lifted it, reading the words slowly. It looked real, her grandfather's handwriting, his usual way of signing his name, even the type of paper he used. For a moment, Doro almost doubted herself. Could it be true? Could her grandfather really have changed his mind before he died? But then her eyes caught something that no one else noticed. At the bottom of the letter was a date, small and neat. Her stomach turned. That date was impossible. Her grandfather had died on January 14th, and this letter was dated March 22nd, more than 2 months later. She felt her heartbeat in her ears, but her voice stayed calm. "Your Honor," Doro said softly, standing up. The courtroom fell silent. "This letter, it's not real. My grandfather was already gone when it says he wrote this." The judge frowned, glancing at the paper again. "Are you certain, Miss Corey?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I was there when he passed. He couldn't have written anything after that day." The lawyer representing Bari and Mina tried to interrupt, claiming Doro was mistaken. But Fina quickly stepped forward, requesting a handwriting and forensic test. The judge agreed, ordering experts to examine the document immediately. For the next few minutes, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Doro sat quietly, her hands clenched together. Bari and Mina looked uneasy for the first time. Their confident faces began to crack as they exchanged nervous glances. When the forensic experts returned, the room fell quiet again. One of them stood and faced the judge. "This letter," he said clearly, "is a forgery. The signature was traced, the ink is newer than the paper, and the date is after the deceased's time of death. It's not authentic." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and shocked whispers filled the air. The judge banged the gavel to restore order, his expression hardening as he looked at Bari and Mina. Fina turned to Doro with a small, proud smile. Bari and Mina's lawyer tried to argue again, but it was useless. The evidence was undeniable. Their perfect plan, the lies, the fake tears, the manipulation, had just fallen apart in front of everyone. The judge demanded an explanation, but neither Bari nor Mina could speak. Mina's face went pale, and Bari dropped his head in shame. Everything they had built, their story, their image, their lies, shattered in seconds. Doro didn't smile. She simply sat still, holding her grandfather's real letter in her hand, the one that had been found earlier, the one where he called her his pride and blessing. In that moment, she knew justice wasn't loud or cruel. It was quiet, powerful, and written in truth. The same truth her parents tried so hard to bury. As the long, exhausting trial was about to end, Fina stood up with calm confidence and asked the judge for permission to present one last piece of evidence. The courtroom went silent. Everyone thought the case was already decided, but Fina slowly placed a small, old dictaphone on the table. It was found among Adamu's belongings, something Doro hadn't seen in years. When Fina pressed play, the entire room leaned in, and the soft, familiar voice of Adamu filled the air. In the recording, Adamu spoke as if he knew this day would come. His tone was gentle, filled with both love and warning. "If they come for her," he said slowly, "tell Doro she was never the mistake they were." Those few words hit like a storm. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Doro froze in her seat, tears flooding her eyes. It felt like her grandfather had reached across time to protect her one last time. The judge's eyes shimmered with emotion as the tape ended. Even the lawyers who had accused Doro lowered their gaze, realizing the truth could no longer be twisted. The court clerk replayed the recording twice to confirm its authenticity. The voice was unmistakably Adamu's, and his words left no room for doubt about his wishes. Bari and Mina shifted nervously in their seats, their once confident faces now pale and trembling. The ruling came quickly. The judge's voice was firm but heavy with disappointment. She declared that the inheritance rightfully belonged to Doro and that Bari and Mina were guilty of forgery, fraud, and defamation. As the officers approached to escort them out, Mina tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Bari looked down, unable to meet Doro's eyes. But there was no joy in Doro's heart. She had won the battle, yet it didn't feel like victory. Watching the people who had given her life but abandoned her now fall apart in front of her didn't bring satisfaction, only sadness. For years, she had imagined this moment, thinking it would heal the wound they left in her heart. But instead, she felt emptier than ever. When the courtroom cleared, Doro sat alone for a while, staring at the dictaphone. She played the recording again, listening to her grandfather's voice tell her she was never a mistake. That was the only thing that mattered now, that she had been loved, chosen, and valued. As she walked out of the courthouse into the quiet evening air, she whispered softly to herself, "Thank you, Grandpa." The world finally knew the truth. Justice was served. But for Doro, it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about letting go. After the verdict was announced and the noise of the courtroom faded, Doro couldn't stop thinking about Bari and Mina. Even though they had caused her so much pain, something inside her wanted to see them one last time. A week later, she walked through the cold, quiet halls of the prison, holding a small bag with a few things they might need, not out of love but out of compassion. When the guard opened the door to the visiting room, she saw them sitting on the other side of the glass. Bari looked completely different. The pride that once filled her eyes was gone, replaced by guilt and fear. Mina, who had always been loud and cruel, now looked small, her face pale and tired. The expensive clothes, the perfume, the fake smiles, all of it was gone. They wore gray uniforms and carried the weight of their choices on their faces. For a moment, Doro almost didn't recognize them. Her mother stared at her with cold eyes. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, her voice sharp, filled with bitterness. Doro didn't answer right away. She looked at them carefully. The people who had abandoned her as a baby, lied to destroy her, and still couldn't understand the meaning of love. Finally, she spoke. Softly, her voice steady and calm. "No," she said. "I'm not happy. But I'm free now, and that's not the same thing." Her words hung in the air like a quiet truth that neither of them could escape. Bari's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Mina turned her head away, ashamed. Doro felt no anger anymore. She realized that revenge wouldn't heal her heart. It would only keep her trapped in the same pain they had created. She stood up, placed the small bag on the table, and whispered, "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need peace." The guard opened the door, and Doro walked out slowly without looking back. The heavy door closed behind her with a soft thud, sealing the past inside. Outside, the air felt fresh, almost new. Doro lifted her face toward the sun, breathing deeply for the first time in a long while. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't broken. The scars were still there, but they didn't define her. She finally understood what her grandfather meant when he said love was stronger than pain. As she walked away from the prison gates, she whispered to herself, "This is what freedom feels like." It wasn't revenge that set her free. It was forgiveness. That a year passed, and Doro's life looked completely different. The quiet countryside estate that once belonged to her grandfather was no longer just a home. It had become a place of hope. With her inheritance, she created the Kori Foundation, named after the small village where Adamu had grown up. It was built for children who had been abandoned, forgotten, or told they didn't matter, just like she once was. The big house that used to echo with silence now overflowed with laughter. The gardens where Doro once sat alone were filled with children playing tag, chasing butterflies, and sharing stories. She had turned every corner of that land into a place of healing. Classrooms where teachers encouraged dreams, dorms filled with warmth, and a library where every book carried the message that no one was a mistake. On the day of the opening ceremony, people from all over came to celebrate. Former staff who had worked for Adamu, local villagers, and dozens of smiling children stood around her, clapping and cheering. Doro wore a simple white dress, nothing fancy, just peaceful, and held a small ribbon in her hands. As she cut it, she felt her grandfather's presence beside her, proud and gentle, just as he had always been. She walked toward the entrance gate where a new sign had been placed. The golden letters gleamed in the sunlight, reading, "For every child who was told they were unwanted, you are the legacy." The moment she read those words, her eyes filled with tears. She thought about the little girl she once was, lonely, scared, desperate for love, and realized that she had finally given that child a home. The applause around her grew louder, but Doro barely noticed. Her heart was full. After the event, a little girl tugged at her hand and asked, "Miss Doro, are you the one who built this place?" Doro knelt down and smiled softly. "No, sweetheart," she said. "We all built it. Everyone who ever felt alone." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft gold and pink, Doro stood on the balcony overlooking the children playing below. She thought about her parents, not with anger anymore but with understanding. They had tried to steal her inheritance, but she had discovered something far more powerful than money. She had found peace. She had found belonging. And most of all, she had found love, the kind that couldn't be taken away, no matter what anyone tried to do. If Doro's story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember. Your past doesn't define you, your choices do. Follow for more powerful stories of karma, redemption, and unstoppable strength. Comment legacy if you believe healing is the greatest revenge. Don't forget to like and share. Someone out there needs this message tonight.